Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentations today, please type them into the Q&A icon on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the June 19th edition of CropTalk. And we've had some really different weather this last little while here. We've had high winds, we've had lots of rain, we've had pounding rain, we've had just in some areas lots of rain, we've had hail damage. So thought it'd be a good idea to get our different specialists to come on today and go through the crops they deal with and talk about or just what we should look at when we're going out to the field and assessing damage and kind of give us an idea of what to look for. It's something where I think a lot of producers throughout the province are seeing it right now, and it's something that's probably the way things are looking might continue. So I think it would be good for us to just get a general understanding of what's happening out there and what we should be looking for, and kind of some of the keys for when the crop is coming back. So we're going to start with that. Then there's been some questions that have come in for our scouting panel. And if there's time, we'll go through the crop update and finish her off for the day. So with that, I'm going to get Sonia to start first. And we're going to look at the oilseed crops. And we're going to go from there. So Sonia, your first slide is up. So if you're ready to go.
Thanks, Lionel. Yeah, we'll get right into it here. So taking a look at severe rain or hail damage in canola, and what does that look like, and how can you assess if your plants are going to recover? So to set the stage, our canola crop in Manitoba here is anywhere from just pre-emerged to bolting. So I have both here on the screen at the top. And if your area had received hail damage, what you're going to be looking for, if it was very severe, is you're going to actually see these plants, even with true leaves. Some of them are going to actually be flat on the ground with really severe hail damage, or you're going to see some kind of white spots or hits on some of the plants. Usually they're very noticeable in potting stage, which evidently we're not there yet. But so for these younger plants, it's really going to be damage to the leaves, and if they've actually been really fully trampled down. So the good news is, though, that the least amount of damage is going to be happening at this younger stage. So if the plants receive hail before flowering, which we are sitting at, so it is going to have much less of an effect on yield than rather having received hail during that flowering period. So when we actually look at what damage does it do to canola, just very specifically, there's two areas on the plant that you're going to want to be looking at. So evidently one area, of course, is going to be your leaf damage, which can be very obvious, as I pointed out. But then the second area that you want to look at is your growing point, which is, oh, and sorry, I'll have Lionel, if you could switch to the next slide. Is going to be your growing point. So what's different in canola than other cereals is that your growing point is going to be above the soil since the plant has emerged. So it is open to receiving hail. And so if we take a look at before the two-leaf stage, so before two true leaves, again, that growing point is going to be still going to be out since the plant has emerged, so there can be damage there. And if the growing point is damaged, the plant will not be able to recover from that. That's what directs its growth. So in a very severe case where that's damaged, unfortunately, that plant will not recover. But also at the two-leaf stage, the other really key things to look at are the cotyledons, if it's that young, or are the stem, are they broken off? Those will also cause your plant mortality. But if there is leaf damage, it is most likely going to be able to actually recover if the growing point is intact. especially in fields this year, if they were actually ended up being very heavy in terms of your stand count, having some decreased competition as well, if there was some damage, could actually potentially benefit your yield as well. But in general, if you did receive some and it has been just leaf damage, the growing point is intact, your canola will be able to recover at this point, depending how severe, of course, it was. Now, that's for the 2-leaf stage. Now, the 2 to 6 leaf stage, which definitely fields are in right now, again, your leaf damage, it's again key whether it was leaf damage or also growing point. But if it's just leaf, I'm going to focus on that now, as the leaves are going to be larger at your 2 to 6 leaf. They may die off, but they will be replaced by new leaves if that growing point is intact. So your canola will be able to recoup those lost leaves, and it's going to put energy into doing that though before moving into flowering and reproductive stages. So this does mean that your maturity of your crop or your field, or even if there's areas that got hit more, it's going to be delayed because it's going to be putting energy into getting those leaves up, growing before heading into flowering. So you're going to see, yeah, potentially delayed maturity for sure. And then your yield potential is now going to be coming from those side branches where the plant has recouped or regrown those leaves, rather than the middle that had died off due to damage those middle areas. So a good thing to do is, if you have had areas that were hit, is to mark plants, mark some in the hard hit areas, and then mark some in the areas that weren't hit with hail or really hard rain as hard, and compare their growth over the next few days. So maybe place a couple flags so that you know which plants you are comparing, and then take a look back in about 8 to 10 days, see if there's been regrowth, if there are new leaves that are growing, and that should give you a great indicator of how your crop is going to bounce back there. I also wanted to put a consideration here, depending on how heavy your crop was hit with hail, for canola, to take a look at your mid-season weed control. If you have the if you It evidently relies on the dense canopy restricting weed growth, but if there's patchiness due to stand reduction or less dense stands, or even with the delayed maturity, if that crop is putting a lot of energy into growing new leaves, then it's evidently not maturing as quickly as it normally would have. You need to assess if another herbicide pass might be needed as well at that point. So then we'll move to the next slide. So when there is hail damage to canola, you also have basically like the barrier of the stem or the leaves here. There's that lack of barrier in those places of damage. So this can increase the risk for both alternaria black spot and blackleg, as they would be able to get through that barrier a lot more easily. And then also, because of that delayed maturity that you're going to see as that plant puts that energy into growing new leaves and that delays flowering, again, you're going to have it move into um, that increased risk of sclerotinia, because you're going to have a prolonged flowering period, especially with our really warm temperatures in that humid time of the season. And then also, just as we talked about leaf damage, keeping an eye on if you've also had flea beetle damage and hail damage, that can do a lot in terms of defoliation for the leaf. So keeping a track of how much of that leaf has actually been defoliated and potentially can cause plant mortality as well. So I'm going to move now to another crop, so we can switch slides here. And this is sunflower. So also hearing some reports of hail damage in sunflower, and I wanted to give an idea of what that looks like and how you can assess your yield change off that. So currently in the province, most of the fields are sitting from about V2 to V6, if not a bit further. And we'll move to the next slide here. Again, very similar with canola. You want to take a look at how much hail damage has affected the leaves. So in terms of defoliation, damage to the terminal bud, also physical injury to the stalk. Evidently, we don't have heads yet, and then plant death, but that's what you're looking for overall in sunflower. And again, it's really looking at, is your plant going to recover? Sunflower, again, they have great root system, they have opportunity to recover, but it does depend how serious the hail damage was. So when hail goes through in the reproductive stages, or when the plant is flowering, that's when it affects it the most. So again, we're not there yet. So leaves will have sustained less yield limiting damage at this point. And but for sure can still reduce stand. So it's good to be aware. And again, the largest concern, similar to canola, is if that loss of that terminal bud or growing point, if that is lost, because that is going to cause plant mortality. So another reminder to take a look at your crop after it receives the damage, but then also take a look potentially 5 to 8 days here, scout afterwards to see how that crop is recovering. So potentially flag a couple plants in hard hit areas and in less hard hit areas, and then come back and take a look. How are those plants recovering? And that should give you a good indicator. And so I'll move to the next slide. This isn't the greatest photo, but I did want to pull it as an example of estimating percent of defoliation on your sunflower leaves. And so this can give you a better indication if you can hold this up against the leaves that you're looking at for how much damage has actually occurred on that leaf. We'll move here to the next slide. I also wanted to bring just to take a look of potentially doing a little yield loss calculation if it has been hit really hard, to understand where you're sitting at with your sunflower population and stand. There's a great resource from NDSU that I want to run through here. And so this is really knowing about how many of those plants are not going to recover and then affect the yield potential you thought you're going into the season with. So the really basic steps are to measure a row. That's 1/1000th of your field, and it gives you here a great conversion for how to do that. And then you're going to count how many plants are not going to recover in that row. So that means that the growing point has been killed or damaged to the point that it will not grow back. And then also estimating defoliation, percent defoliation in that row. And then you're going to do that for 10 rows across your field. And what you're going to do is then use this is from the NDSU Sunflower Production Guide. There's two tables that you can see here on the left. Sorry, we'll move to the next slide, Lionel. You can see here on the left side, that gives you the stage of your crop. And then on the top here, it gives you have to assess the percent of your leaf area that was destroyed. So let's say you're sitting at a V3 stage and you think 20% of your leaf area on average was destroyed in that 1/1000th of the field that you're looking at. It's going to give you an estimate of 1% of yield loss. So again, those sunflowers are going to be able to evidently recover quite well, still very young, and have that energy to do that as long as the growing point is still intact. So that's, and then you're going to do, we'll move to the next slide. You're also going to take into account your percent of stand reduction. So how many of those plants did have their growing point damaged beyond repair, so they will have mortality. And again, you're just going to take your stage and then the percent of stand reduction that you expect, and that will give you your approximate percent of yield loss. And we'll move to the next slide here. I just gave an example of doing that in a single row, but definitely feel free to reach out if you have questions about this, but it can give you a bit of an idea of what you're looking at if you have had a really heavy hail event and are curious, of course, of what does that look like in my potential yield moving forward as well. So we'll move to the next slide. That's my really brief overview here. Please reach out if you have any questions, and I'll give it back to Lionel.
Okay, Sonia, a couple of questions. I'm just going to, okay, growing point on the sunflower plant, location. I'm going to go back to the picture you had on there. Okay, so the growing point in that picture would be right in the middle, is it? Or
Yeah, so it's right in the middle of your, so from the very beginning of having your cotyledon leaves, or cotyledon, sorry, and your true leaves, it's that, yeah, growing point. It's right there in the middle. That's the next phase of growth. Yeah.
okay, and then other question that I got this week was some of the canola was just coming through the ground, and it wasn't actually hail damage; it was more the heavy rain, and basically turned the field black again. Are those plants? So it was just in the cotyledon stage, I'm guessing. So are those plants still viable and they're still gonna come up, or what's your opinion there?
Yeah, so had they come up at all, Lionel?
Yeah, they were just in the cotyledon stage.
Okay, yeah. So it's really going to be about, again, it's going to be about going back. The answer, I guess, is time to be able to assess here again, in you could go back in about, 5 days or so, because if they will most likely, depending how hard it is, be able to spring back as long as the leaves actually have access to sun, etc., to give them the energy to keep growing and repair themselves, and keep growing through their growth stages. So best bet is to just come back in about, even 3 to 5 days. Just take a look if they're starting to spring back up, but they should, yeah, I think they should be able to for sure.
Okay, and the other thing I mentioned was that being that they were just in the cotyledon stage, there might be some plants that haven't germinated yet or haven't come through, so that might help in the count as well.
Yes, yep, absolutely. So again, just taking just giving it some time to see how the field will recover. Yeah.
You bet. Okay, thanks, Sonia. I don't think we have any other questions. Just double check with Laurie.
Yep, no, all good.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to flip over to our cereal crops, and Kirk will take over from there.
Great, thanks, Lionel. I'll just bring my screen up here.
You bet.
Okay, so I have some pictures on the screen. This is from, oh, sorry. Okay, so I have some pictures on the screen showing some hail damage this week that I was sent from Carolyn Clausen, who works at the Winkler Co-op. So pretty bad looking wheat field with all of that hail damage.
And can you just go in presenter mode?
Oh, I am not sure what is that.
Laurie,
Does that work now?
we're still seeing your next slide. Laurie, can you?
Sorry. Yeah, just go up to display settings, right there. Oops.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Do that again. That's no,
Okay.
sorry. Caught me dreaming there. Swap it out.
Oh, got it.
Swap.
Okay, thank you.
There you
Is
go.
that better?
Perfect.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, yeah, so these are some photos that I had sent to me this week looking at hail damage in spring wheat. So a pretty bad, like a pretty good amount of damage caused to this crop. So the wheat was probably at like in stem elongation. So let's go forward on talking about how to assess it and what kind of damage you'd expect. So for wheat, prior to stem elongation, the growing point is below the soil surface and will likely not be damaged by hail. So in Manitoba, we have a variety, like wheat in a variety of stages. So from, say, the 4-leaf stage and a couple of tillers, to boot stage is what I've heard from most advanced. So depending on where your crop is, if it received hail, will make a big difference on what you'd expect. So before stem elongation, not a huge deal. You'll have a lot of regrowth and tillering. After stem elongation, it can be pretty difficult to assess. You can see that the stems can look very shredded and have not a lot of leaf growth, but you can still have spikes that can pollinate and fill, and regrowth from new tillers can still occur with hail damage during jointing or the boot stage. And I should also say for winter wheat, most of that wheat would have probably been at the boot stage or early head emergence if they did experience hail. So similar to most other crops, the more advanced the wheat is at the time of hail, you'll have greater yield loss. And the greatest yield reduction does come around that like anthesis milk stage does tend to be the highest. So thankfully, I don't think any of the spring or winter wheat would have been at that stage when we received hail. And the table I'm showing is just shows some research done at the University of Wisconsin looking at hail damage in small grains, so cereal crops. And this would be 100% of stems bent. So this does show that even if you are at the boot stage, yield reduction about 30 to 40% yield reduction. So it can be, quite a bit of yield reduction, but like I said, it is difficult to assess just depending on how severe the hail damage was. I just wanted to pull up another graph here. This was from a research study done in Alberta more recently, like within the last few years, looking at timing and severity of hail damage across a variety of crop types. So they just looked at dry beans, field peas, and wheat. So if we can look at the wheat bars here, they did both light and heavy. So this was mechanical hail damage done with like with chains whipping on a tractor. So the early for wheat, you can't really see the bars, so there wasn't a decrease in yield, and that was just before the beginning of stem elongation. So at that point, they didn't see any yield reduction. The mid, so the white bars with the dots in that, would be at flag leaf. So their results are very similar to the ones from Wisconsin that I just showed. So the range of yield loss would be about 35 to I think 42% from the light to heavy. And then at anthesis, which is what the winter wheat would have been more approaching that anthesis stage or between flag leaf and anthesis. They were looking at, I think about like 37 to about 50%, 55% yield reduction with that late hail timing, depending on if it was light or heavy. So just showing some of that research and gives an idea of people of what they could expect, although obviously every field is different and the severity of the hail, can change a lot from field to field or even within parts of the field. So for oats and barley, they will tiller and recover better from hail than wheat, especially prior to the boot stage. So you'd expect, yield loss similarly to wheat as those crops are growing similarly, but they would recover better prior to the boot stage. Around that like boot emergence, head emergence, and thesis stage, you'd probably expect fairly similar amounts of yield reduction. And there has been reports of, hail even at the boot stage, still oats that were severely hailed even at the boot stage going on to produce about 80% of typical yield. So, they do have a good potential to recover. And we do know like how well those oats and barley can tiller, especially if there's been some sort of damage. So for corn, so early in the season, the growing point would be below the soil surface, and result in very little yield loss. So the growing point does emerge from the ground around the V5 stage. So anywhere from like V5, V6, you are starting to see the growing point come above the surface. The plant that I have showing on the screen here would be almost at V5. So you can see 4 leaf colors at the bottom, and then the 5th leaf from the bottom is the leaf color isn't fully developed, so I wouldn't call that V5 yet, but that's just an example of what a crop would look at just before the growing point would be expected to come out of the ground. In Manitoba, we do have a range of corn growth stages as well, I think anywhere between V2 to V6. So some of those corn crops that did get hail damage would have been more susceptible or have the growing point potentially above ground when the hail did hit. So kind of similarly to spring cereals and winter cereals, the most yield loss that you would expect from hail would be around that reproductive stage. So tasseling and silking would cause hail damage at that time, would cause the most yield loss. And once the growing point is above ground, the crop does increase in vulnerability to hail damage until about that tasseling stage when it's most susceptible. And then you do see a decrease in yield loss as the corn crop approaches maturity. So like Sonia mentioned, it would be important to determine what you actually see for plant stand for corn. So if you do see a lot of damage where the crop isn't going to recover, it'd be important to establish, what your stand is. And also looking at leaf defoliation. So yield loss for corn can be very well estimated using percent leaf defoliation. It is important to go back and check, say, about that 5 to 10 days after a hail event, because it is difficult to see how damaged a leaf is very early on. And a few days after the hail event, you can actually see what part of the leaf has died and what part is still alive. So for corn, this is a very busy table, but this is a good estimate of the percent of corn grain yield loss due to defoliation at various growth stages. So if we're looking at, say, the 7-leaf stage, which would be the most advanced I would expect corn to be right now in Manitoba, even with 100% leaf defoliation, you're looking at 9% yield loss. So that crop can recover very well from leaf defoliation. As you can see, if we're going more into like the tasseling and silking stage, you do tend to see much more yield loss with increasing amounts of leaf defoliation. And that's all I have for cereal crops.
Okay, and with the corn, so if it's bent over or almost broken, and it wasn't in the V6 or even the V5 stage, what would I look for when I'm out there in the field to see if I'm getting regrowth coming?
Yeah, so if the stem is completely broken, you'd be looking for regrowth from the growing point at that time would be expected to be below ground, or should be below ground before that V5 stage or V6 stage. So you'd be looking to see new growth coming from the base of the stem. And if you are seeing like a new whorl being pushed up from the middle of the stem, say 5 to 10 to even 15 days after your hail event, that plant is regrowing and is able to continue growing. So we are expected to get some warmer temperatures in the next week or so. So we should start to see more rapid growth from some of these plants. So you would be expecting to see that new leaf whorl being pushed up through the middle of the stem.
Okay, and if it's just bent over, will you get that kind of a curved stem and it'll just start growing up again?
Yeah, I think you'd expect to see the plant recover. I think just like Sonia said, like it's just to give things a few days to see how that growth resumes and how that crop is going to recover from that damage. But you would expect it to recover fairly well before the growing point is above ground.
Okay, and then I guess on wheat, should I be watching for the tillers now that, like, I'm thinking winter wheat, sorry. Should I be watching for the tillers now to be the ones to go for, or being that some of those main stems were hit and bent over, they're really not going to produce?
Yeah, I think that for the wheat, yeah, you would be expecting like it is tough to tell because if the crop is at the booting stage, it can look it can look really bad, but it is possible that head that hasn't emerged yet would still be able to grow, would still be able to pollinate and fill, and may not be that damaged. But you would expect, yes, mostly regrowth from new tillers, if that main stem is completely damaged and shredded.
Okay, Lori, I see there's a question that's coming.
Yep, you bet. So is fungicide a help to recover from hail damage in cereals at early stages?
You know, what was interesting is this study that I have up on the screen here. They did look at fungicides and fertility for recovery, and they didn't see any significant differences. This is just one study that took place over 3 years in Alberta, but they didn't see any benefit of fungicides or enhanced nutrition with hail recovery. That said, if you are seeing, like you have damaged leaves, damaged stems, and the plant is stressed, I would be watching it very carefully to see what sort of diseases are developing and be on top of fungicide application when there are diseases present. So they didn't see any benefit of fungicide application in the absence of disease, But, having a stressed plant, I'd want to be on top of, applying fungicides and good weed control to help that plant out as much as you can. So I think like preventative fungicides didn't show a benefit.
Okay, great. Thanks. That's what I have.
Okay, well, I think that's it for right now, Anne, and we will turn it over to Dennis, and let's look at the pulses and soybeans.
Alrighty, so let us now share my screen and we will get into this here. And we're gonna go, oops. I just gotta move things around a little bit on my screen. It's, come on, get rid of this here. There we go. All right, so I should be able to see my screen now. We're going to start off with hail damage and field peas. I'm going to kind of intermix this with wind damage as well. No, this is not a misprint. It is, the first few slides are from June 14th, 2018. We had an instance where back in 2018 where we had our plots that ended up getting hailed out. So let's move into these first few slides here. Before I get into it here, one of the things I just want to re-emphasize here, when you're talking about staging here, one of the things that we look at on a field pea is we want to count the number of what I call elephant ears clinging to the main stem to determine what stage you're at. So right now we're probably in the 7th to 8th node stage, so we're past the spraying stage for the most part for products like Viper. But the one thing to kind of keep in mind when you look at this here, down here, I'm just going to put my laser pointer on here. Down in this area here, you're going to see the scale nodes. And when the upper portion of the plant is damaged, the scale nodes tend to regrow. And that's what we saw back in 2018. So this was a storm on June 14th, day after the hailstorm. And you can see these peas are really beat up here. The hail was prior to flowering. The soybean plots that we had at this particular site were actually written off. They weren't worth taking forward anymore. But this gave us an opportunity to see how the peas would recover through the growing season. You can see here that those peas are pretty flattened. But as we talked about before, there are scale nodes that will start to regrow. So coming back on July 16th in 2018, those peas recovered very well. So this is kind of the just between the two reps here. And you can see how the peas have recovered quite dramatically. As the season went on, early August, we were looking at the peas starting to dry down and just as they would normally at that time of the year. Here are the peas at full maturity. So peas generally are a crop that can take a beating before flowering and still come back. So whether that's wind damage or whether that's hail, at this point here, I'm not as concerned about the peas. But soybeans and dry beans that we'll get into in a moment here, it will be a different story. So we did take these plots to maturity and to harvest. And here are the results that were published in Seed Manitoba. You can see here at the Minto Boissevain site here, the harvest date was August 23rd. The yield of the check that year was 48 bushels an acre. The LSD was 11%, and the CV was 5.9, which is actually right in line with any of the other trials that we ran that year. So definitely a great decision to kind of keep that plot that year, and it does give growers some hope, I guess, if you're having some wind damage to your peas or hail damage at this early stage, that they will tend to recover. This is a picture that Lionel had provided to me of those field peas from last year. And again, same idea. Those peas are really beat up here by the storm that moved through. And talking to Lionel afterwards, that yield actually was still in the mid 40s that year. So again, just reemphasizes how soybeans can recover here. So what about soybeans? Well, I guess the first thing to really kind of think about here is you need to do a stand assessment after the storm, but you need to wait a few days, 6 to 7 days after the weather event, to allow those plants to regrow, because the day after they're going to look pretty rough shape. And looking at it afterwards, the day after, you might want to replant right away. Now, ideally, the stand you want to be at is 140 to 160,000. That's the ideal target range that you want to be at. In herbicide-tolerant varieties, anything above 80,000 plants per acre is okay, but your weed control is really going to need to be managed through the season to keep those fields clean. Conventional beans will be a little bit more difficult to manage those weeds, so you have to really be on top of that with the products that you do have. With the herbicide tolerant systems, with being able to spray glyphosate and keep that field clean, the field still has some very good yield potential. Going back a few years, one of the on-farm network trials that the Manitoba Pulse Growers had, one of the first ones actually, was done out in that St. Pierre area. And the stand reduction, and this was due to actually poor seed quality. The grower had planted 200,000 seeds per acre and ended up with about 60,000 plants per acre with a lot of gaps in the field. And they were able to keep it clean all season and still was able to maintain a 40+ bushel yield on those herbicide tolerant beans. Now they weren't hail, but the stand reduction was there, and there's big gaps in the field where you could actually walk across the field on a diagonal and not hit a plant. So it was fairly thin. So you know, that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. But doing that stand assessment 6 to 7 days afterwards, and what you're looking for is, we'll go to the next slide here. So this is an example here doing the hula hoop method using a 28.25-inch hula hoop. This is 12 plants in that hoop, which means 120,000 plants, which is a good stand. So whatever you get with a 28.25-inch hula hoop, you multiply that number by 10,000. So if you're at 8 plants, that would be 80,000 plants per acre. Now you need to do a good stand assessment, and what you need to look at is you need to look at what plants you have left. So here is a example here of you know, 2 plants here where your terminal bud here is still okay in both of those here. And you can see here, right down in here, if that terminal bud was damaged, you will get some regrowth through here. So that's where you need to be a little bit patient and wait that out a little bit. And it's a little bit more challenging now with the deadlines for any replant. You know, we're basically a day away from any replant to any kind of crop. But in some instances, growers may be, if you've already done some pre-merge products on there on your soybeans, you might not have any options to go back into another crop. So again, you know, sometimes having a little bit of patience and seeing what happens with that is maybe the way to go. Now, this next slide here is a slide that Lionel sent. These plants are much rougher. You can see here, this plant has been clipped below the cotyledon, so that plant is done. These other plants here, the terminal bud is gone, so you should see some regrowth in here. But the plant here is pretty much done as well. So what you need to do is when you do your stand counts, you need to count what the live plants are. And anything that still has any terminal bud, you count, and anything that is above the cotyledons, you can count, and then reassess in that, you know, at that time if you need to replant. Or do something else with that field. Now we're at the deadline, so I guess we'll have to see what happens. But I think in some instances, there's, you know, definitely going to be some wind damage here, some dry beans here that were pretty beat up. Dry beans will regrow kind of the same way because you have your axillary buds here at the cotyledons. But these plants here, the terminal buds, look like they're pretty much toast. So this field would be a little bit more challenging as far as to see the regrowth that you would hope for. So in that situation, I guess we'll have to, you know, if you're assessing, this was about 2 days after the event. This is some wind damage. And so you'd have to reassess a few days after in that 6 to 7 days to see if those plants are going to be regrowing or not. These should, but they're going to take a bit of a beating in the whole scheme of things as well. And as was mentioned earlier, disease is one thing that can affect dry beans, like bacterial blights, for example, but keep in mind that the fungicides don't work on the bacteria. So even though you know, you have fungicide options for spraying for things like white mold in dry beans, and you really don't have any options for spraying for bacterial blight. So keep those things in mind. Some of the information here, I'm just going to jump over this one slide. This is from if the pulse growers have done some work on this with respect to soybeans and you know, at the little bit later stages, at that V2, V3 stage, yield loss is minimal if hail damage is limited to leaf defoliation, but I don't think we're quite at that stage yet. Most beans were in that first trifoliate stage, so you should start to see some regrowth, but again, you're gonna have to really do a good stand count. So here's some of the results from that one study that they had done. You can see here where the terminal bud has been clipped off, but regrowth was expected in this case, and you can see here how that regrowth has started from the axillary buds here where the cotyledons were here. So just something to kind of keep in mind, that you just have to be a little bit patient with that. Again, just some final thoughts here. You need to wait, at least a week to assess the regrowth. And again, with the cooler weather that we're seeing here, we're not going to see as rapid regrowth as what we would if it was warmer. Be aware of what the growth stage are. If it's earlier in the season, crops like soybeans will tend to recover much better than once you get later in the season. The greatest amount of damage you can see to yield for soybeans is at hail damage at early flowering. That's where you see a lot of the damage and yield reduction. Up until that point, you do tend to see some regrowth. But probably the best thing to really do is assess the stands in multiple areas of the field to know exactly what kind of stand you have. Be in communication with your crop insurance to look at different options that you could do on a particular field, and explore those options. But in a lot of cases, it's a matter of having a little patience and waiting for the beans to regrow. With that being said, I'll open it up for any questions that you may have.
Hey, Dennis, one of the questions I was getting is on peas. They weren't far, I guess, from being close to the first flowers, maybe another week. And the concern is with Mycosporella. What's your opinion on fungicides early, or maybe an extra pass besides the one at first flower?
Well, I guess, again, you have to remember that peas do get bacterial blight as well. So that is, one thing to kind of keep in mind. The bacterial blight, there's really no fungicide options that are really going to help you in that situation because it's a bacteria. What I would typically do with Mycosporella is Mycosporella needs a few factors to really start to infect the plant, and one of which is plant canopy. If you have a dense plant canopy, and you have good moisture conditions for allowing for that development of the disease, the forecast is forecasting for rain, and you have some disease present. If you have all those factors, and there is on the Manitoba Pulse Grower website, there is a fungicide decision tree, or I guess a chart you can use and use those factors. But the long and the short of it is, for Mycosporella, I would still do your timing as you would normally at that early flowering stage. Assess the risk potential for Mycosporella, because really, the bigger thing that's really going to show up is the bacteria. And the bacteria, you're not going to really be able to do anything. But I would say just reassess once you get close to flowering, and not just put a fungicide on, because it's not going to give you any benefits if there's no disease present.
Okay. I don't think there's any other questions right now, Dennis. So we will continue on.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen then. So.
Okay, so we're going to jump into the sorry about that. We're going to jump into the crop scouting panel. And one thing that has come up this week that I think is something we should be aware of was some reports of stripe rust found in North Dakota. And David Kaminsky is on today, and he's going to give us a little bit of information regarding that.
Okay, thanks, Lionel. I am going to share my screen. You got a great picture there of stripe rust on a leaf. That's probably spring wheat. And so thanks to you for bringing to my attention that North Dakota State University in their crop and pest report was finding some instances of stripe rust, both on winter wheat and on spring wheat. The locations are still somewhat south of us, in the middle to lower portion of North Dakota. I'll show you some maps in a moment. The disease is known both as stripe rust and as yellow rust. So it is visually quite different from, say, the leaf rust that we might be more familiar with here in southern Manitoba. The pustules are very small, and they're usually lined up between the veins of the leaf. And some people have described this as kind of an egg carton appearance of the pustules. These ones are opening already, so they're releasing the thick-walled ureospores that can become airborne on upper wind currents and move into our area. Let me see here. I have some other tabs to show you where the disease is. So the reports on spring wheat are from Fargo area, Castleton County, and then the winter wheat reports are from down here, that's Slope County.
I'm just going to interrupt you for a second, David. Did you
Yes.
change visual? Are we still seeing crop and pest report from North Dakota State University? Is that what you want us to see?
No, you should be seeing my web browser and
No,
some
you
images from it.
if you want to go back to sharing again and yeah, you just chose the North Dakota State University crop and pest report page to share.
Okay. Sorry about that.
There we go. I see it now.
I will back up a little bit. Well, I'll use this map too. These are the 3 locations where stripe rust has been found. You can see it is still some distance away from us, and these reports were 12 days ago, so it is quite possible that ureospores from those sites are in the air and could be moving towards us. We've had strong southerly winds. Now, the thing about this rust too, stripe rust or yellow rust, is that it is favored by cool, moist conditions, whereas the other rust, leaf rust, stem rust, oat crown rust, all like things on the warmer side. So that is maybe a reason that stripe rust is appearing this year. Temperatures have been on the cooler side. Now, the varieties that we've got in Manitoba all have pretty good resistance. I was just looking at the top 4 spring wheat cultivars, Brandon, Starbuck, Wheatland, and Viewfield, and they are all moderately resistant to stripe rust. Likewise, the winter wheat that we have here, varieties like Wildfire, Emerson, Gold Rush, they have moderately resistant to even resistant rating when it comes to stripe rust. The only time that I have seen stripe rust in Manitoba is in plots at the University Farm here in Carmen, and it was on spreader rows, which are super susceptible to stripe rust. So in most cases, we have environmental conditions that are not so favorable to this rust, and we have good resistance built into the varieties that we have. Okay. So when I was talking about symptoms on the leaves, I guess you weren't seeing my screen, but this is the symptoms very close. You can see those pustules are very small compared to leaf rust, and they're lined up along the veins of the leaf, giving that striped appearance. Now, as far as crop stage and whether fungicides might be applicable, that picture on the left of winter wheat fields, that was near Fargo. You can see the crop is quite advanced. It has finished flowering already, and the leaf or the disease, the stripe rust, is quite well established even on the upper leaves. You're not going to accomplish much by a fungicide application if this is what you're seeing in the field. Um, on the spring wheat picture on the right, those are from Slope County, which is the western part of North Dakota. The symptoms are found on the lower leaves. That does mean it's probably been there for some time, but it's a disease that you can watch the progression upwards in the plant and help you determine whether or not fungicide application might be applicable at the T2 timing. I think that's all the comments I have about.
We're not hearing you, Lionel, if you're speaking. I don't have any questions here for you, David. We'll just give Lionel a minute to reconnect his audio. Yeah, thank you also, Lionel, or David, for going back to that slide. We didn't see that one slide. So go ahead, Lionel. Oh, I think we have lost Lionel. Oh, here he comes. Okay, you can unmute yourself again, Lionel.
Okay,
There we go.
not quite sure what happened there, but did you hear my question, David?
No. And David is not on currently. So
okay,
oh,
well,
here he
we'll
comes.
just
He's back.
okay.
He's back. He's back. Yep.
Oh, okay. So David, the question was, would my fungicide application for Fusarium take care of the stripe rust?
And you're on mute, David.
Hi, it's Marla here. David just came to my office. I think his Zoom crashed as well, so he's just heading back to his office now.
Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll maybe continue on, and I'll get David to.
He's back.
John
Oh,
Javosky
okay.
just let me know that there was a question for me. I'm sorry I missed it.
Okay, yeah, David, the question was when I'm spraying my winter wheat or my spring wheat for Fusarium, is the product I'm using going to take care of the stripe rust?
Well, it will have an impact, yes. But again, if the disease was already on the upper leaves, you have had some yield reduction from the loss of photosynthetic area. You're not going to correct that. And generally, fungicides don't have any, what we have heard in the past as a kickback action, where they make things better. What you see is what you got, and it might limit the spread, but that's all you can expect.
Okay, and David, I think there was one more for you regarding Fusarium in Manitoba. It looks like we're pretty high risk right now.
Well, looking at that map that you're sharing, Lionel, that harkens back to June the 6th, and that's some time ago. It changes daily, and the most recent one that my summer student Matthew posted on our website from this week shows kind of a model. There is still some high risk in the north, and particularly in the northwest, but down here in the southern regions, it is a mix of low and moderate risk.
Okay. That's kind of funny because I would have thought it would be high with the rains we've been getting in the cool conditions. But so do we need more heat then for Fusarium to be more of a risk?
Oh man, I wish Timmy was on the line as he was when I introduced the new forecast map, because he knows the intimacies of the models behind that depiction, that color depiction. Oh, he is he's standing outside my door. I don't know if I'm just going to unplug my headset and get Timmy to sit in front of my computer.
Thanks, David. Lionel, can you hear me?
You bet, Timmy. So the question was with the rain and the high level moisture we've been having, and so are we just lacking heat to make the risk higher? Or
Yes, definitely, we would need some more heat to have a high risk, but the models that we've developed are actually more sensitive to humidity more than any other parameter. When we had done the research, we noticed in the order of preference um, was relative humidity, followed by heat, and then followed by rainfall. And depending on which of the actual model you're looking at, spring wheat, winter wheat, we also notice quite different parameters and different equations were used for those. But in a nutshell, yes, we would need more heat and more humidity to have that high or extreme. But that being said, too, I think we had discussed that it also depends on the crop stage. If you are not at the antithesis stage, the risk for FHB would be quite low, or almost non-existent. So if the crops are not at that stage yet, I wouldn't worry about the map, even if it's showing all red. If your crop is not at that stage, it wouldn't be a concern.
yeah, and that's right. And I think the only crop we would have now that producers are looking at would be their winter wheat crops that are probably right in the stage for that application. So great, thanks, Timmy. So just a couple slides here, highlights of the crop report. And I think we've talked quite a bit about staging wise already, so I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time there. We're pretty much done seeding, so that's good, and everything seems to be advancing fairly well. Fall rye is basically fully headed in a lot of areas right now, and spring wheat, our winter wheat is in the boot stage to early head emergence right now. So oil seeds, as Sonia mentioned, vary in stage from cotyledon to pre-bolting stage in some areas. So it's all over the board as well. And but seeding of oil seeds is pretty much complete as well. She mentioned sunflowers in the V3 to V4 growth stage, and with so yeah, so basically the crop or oilseed crops are kind of going to be a long season when it comes for timing for sclerotinia, because we're going to be all over the board for what stage some of the crop is in. Pulses, and again, Dennis mentioned quite a bit of this already, but they're pretty much in peas 6 to 8 node stage. Soybeans, are probably in anywhere from the unifoliate to the trifoliate stage. Dry beans in the first trifoliate stage, and again, varying depending on the amount of damage that might have been done from recent storms and weather conditions. I wanted to touch on this one. I think Marla is on. So Marla, maybe I'll just get you to give us an update on the crop diagnostic school.
You bet. So we have our main crop diagnostic school is happening on July 3rd and 4th and 10th and 11th. Just for everyone's information, we have kind of put the hold on July 9th just because we had some lower registration for that day. And rather than hoping to fill it, we just figured we would move people and just have them come on the 3rd, 4th, 10th, and 11th. So just disregard the 9th on the screen. If you are still interested in attending, we still have spaces available, especially for the 10th and 11th. To register, just send us an email to mbcropschool@gmail.com and include your name and contact information and how many people you want to attend and which day you'd like to attend for. We also will request you to send any dietary restrictions we need to know about to let our caterers know. And then on July 5th, we have Farmer Day. Farmer Day is being supported by, offered through the commodity associations. So if you are a member of one of the 3 commodity associations, Pulse, Crop Alliance, or Canola, then they will be sponsoring your cost to attend. If you are not a member, but you were a farmer, you are still allowed to attend. We will just charge you $75 for the day the farmer cost. So again, if you're looking to register for Farmer Day, just throw us an email, again, to the same email address, mbcropschool@gmail.com, and just put Farmer Day in the title so we know that that's the day that you are looking to register for.
Great, thanks, Marla. Diversification centers. So the 4 diversification centers have set their dates for their summer tours, and there they are on the screen now, the July 25th, July 31st, August 7th, and August the 8th. So if you're interested in attending and you want to pre-register, there is the information of the different centers and contact people and ways of getting in contact with them. So definitely 4 different days with 4 different sets of information. A lot of good stuff happening at the farm. So definitely put one of those days on your calendar to attend and try to get some really good information. Field crop production guides. Again, we're pretty much, I would say, at the halfway point of spraying right now. Wet conditions have brought out a lot of airplanes, but there's still a lot of guys right now going out with a high clearance and maybe making a few ruts in the field, but we're getting a lot of it done. We haven't had a lot of days without a lot of wind. Today might be one of those days where we might get a good day in of spraying. So again, if you need a guide, they're available at your ag service centers, or you can contact any one of the crop extension specialists. The Manitoba hay listing, we're getting closer to this year's crop being ready to cut. So if you're going to be haying and think you might have hay for sale, here's an opportunity or an option for you to market your feed. Crop production extension specialist, there's our contact information. So if you have any questions, this past week has been a lot of questions regarding related to weather, but we're starting to get some other questions regarding staging and application of fungicides. So again, if you've got questions, definitely give any one of these people a call. Our livestock specialists, again, if you've got questions with cattle on pasture, if you've got questions about feed for this coming winter, different options for putting up feed, give any one of these people a call and they can help you with that. Our service centers, they're going to be busy shortly with seeded acreage reports. And so definitely, if they're not busy, they're probably busy right now with them. But if you got to have your reports in, so make sure you don't miss the deadline there. And that's be it for today. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending. I'd like to thank our presenters. And if you're available, we'll see you next week, June the 26th, for our next edition of Crop Talk. Thanks for attending.